Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Hazzed, and today we're going to be doing a 7.3 PvE Frost DK update guide. Now, I've been talking to quite a few people and reading your comments from the last video, and it definitely seems like some people need some updates, as the current meta for Frost DK PvE is kind of interesting. It requires certain things to be able to pull it off. So, let's talk about it. First, we're going to start off with talents, and then kind of in between that area, I'll start relating to what gear we're going to need and why using that gear is going to be so key for utilizing this build correctly. So what we got going on for talents, I lightly touched on it in the PvP videos. We got Runic Attune and Murderish Efficiency. Now, the reason why we're using these two abilities is basically to keep up consistency, since they buffed up our base damage by quite a bit. So the more base damage that we can get and the more stuff we can pump out, the more damage we do. It just keeps up our consistency overall, since with this spec it's really about dealing massive amounts of damage over time instead of having a huge burst all at once. Now, what's going on with these two abilities, why that's so key, is also with the 4 set going on with the current raid tier that you'll be using right now. So the, of course, 2 set and the 4 set, the 2 set every 60 runic power spent while Pillar of Frost is active increases the duration of Pillar of Frost by 1 second. Now, every 3 runes spent increases the strength bonus of your next Pillar of Frost by 1%. So as you can see, you want to have more runes, you want to have more runic power to deal more obliterates and more frost strikes, so you can benefit from this 2 set and this 4 set, overall keeping up your consistency and also making your pillars, the second, third, and fourth one, as long as the fight goes on, are going to be stronger than the first one, and that's what's actually going to keep up your DPS and outplay the breath spec when trying to deal maximum DPS on a single target. Now, going on with the next ability is Ice Cap, and the reason being is you're just reducing the remaining cooldown at Pillar of Frost by 1 second, which this also meshes with Obliteration, since it grants crits, of course, granting Killing Machine, further reducing the cooldown by having guaranteed crits. So those mesh well together when used in the same area, and that's going to make you burst a lot more, have faster pillars, which are also going to benefit from the 4 set that we were talking about, kind of snowballing your damage. And as we got the next level 60, Winter is coming, just basic CC, get to choose when to use that. If there is anything in single target, if you're raiding, most likely there's not going to be too much, there might be stuff here and there. As for the level 75 talent, Inexorable Assault is definitely going to be the one you're going to use at the moment. I mean, it takes some of our weakest, kiting things getting distance on us, and it gives us a buff to our DPS when we start back on a target. Obviously, it's going to be the best thing if you have to get off the target for any reason at all. As for the level 90 talent, we're going to be using Gathering Storms, and of course it's going to be the strongest out of the 3 tiers in the level 90. Frost Scythe being for AoE consistency, and Frozen Pulse just kind of isn't very good right now. Even when you're using Gathering Storms and Frozen Pulse, using the legendary that gives you both of them, Frozen Pulse is still terrible, even though you're forcing a lot of downtime. You can even go something like Shattering Strikes and Freezing Fog, so you get a lot more downtime to benefit from Frozen Pulse. And Frozen Pulse is still not very good. It doesn't deal much damage. Maybe in AoE situations it might be a little bit more viable, but as far as single target goes, it's not very good. As for the level 100 talent, if you're going to be using the full-blown consistency spec, Obliteration is going to be the way to go. Being that when using Breath of Sindragosa, you have a huge breath up front because you have your both empowered rune weapons if you're still currently playing or playing it before the patch. You have a huge burst up front, and then your next breaths are going to be a lot weaker than your first one was. But as for Obliteration and the fact that you're using the Force set to generate extra strength percentage procs, Obliteration is going to be the way to go, and it's also going to increase your consistency DPS, being that it's on a 1.5 minute cooldown instead of a 2-minute cooldown. And the other thing that I've noticed about current breath is even though it has a big burst up front, does quite a bit of damage. If you have the right legendaries, or technically right now if you're doing single target raid DPS, the wrong legendaries, it can still be fairly good. but it destroys overall consistency in the long run. Not too much, because right now I'm not using the 4 set and I'm mainly focusing on Mythic Pluses, so I go straight strength, damage, crit, haste, higher eye level gear, and then completely avoid that single target by going Breath of Sindragosa to make up for my single target on PvE, of course. Um, so I kind of have a different personal build. My own personal build is slightly different. It's running Breath of Cinder goes, and I basically take off the 4 set, and I control where my damage goes a little more than being based off just consistency. And that's because, as you can see here, I'm running Perseverance of the Ebon Martyr, which basically increases Howling Blast damage, recently damaged by Remorseless Winter, which does increase single target and AoE by quite a bit, but mainly AoE, and it's not very good after all those Howling Blast nerfs, at least not after the legendaries I'm about to talk about. And of course, I'm using Seal of Necro, which gives me 2 empowers, which is really strong for Breath of Sindragosa, but not nearly as strong for raid DPS as it is for Mythic Plus DPS, since the fights or the boss fights happen to be much longer. So what we got going on for legendaries with this right now, the best legendaries to be using with the consistency spec is going to be the risks. Now, the risks are strongest for breath and this spec now because of all the Howling Blast nerfs. Increasing your Pillar of Frost damage, or Pillar of Frost is active, you deal 15% more frost damage. That's also going to combine with your 4 set ability, pumping up your consistency every time you use Pillar of Frost and elongating your Pillar of Frost using the 4 set, and it's going to deal quite a bit more damage than having like the helmet or something like that. It really just again snowballs that damage quite a bit more for that consistency. As for the second item you're going to want to be using is Cold of Heart. Now I have seen a lot of DKs either using one or the other and some kind of off item, probably because they don't have both, and they'll use like the risks and the waste, which would be really nice for consistency because you wouldn't have very much downtime. It would give you, all the runes you could ever want. It did just give you so much using the consistency spec, and some people would go like chest and belt if they didn't have it. But otherwise, I mean, it's really what you want to go is using the chest and the wrists. Are going to give you the best consistent DPS using this spec. I have seen some AoE fights where a couple guys are using Cold Core, which is fairly good, but it's still not going to give you as much DPS with this spec. Now, the other important thing for this spec is going to be what trinkets you're using for the consistency spec. Being that you don't want controlled burst with this spec. You really want either the overtime or you want the beneficial stats with this just to increase your overall damage. Kind of like, I wouldn't say spike counterweight would be the best example, or fell oiled infernal machine. Like this one is pretty good. It's why I'm using it. 2200 plus strength. Being it has a socket and of course the haste cooldown, which makes up for some of my lacking haste. But some of the better stuff to use would be more like the Cradle of Anguish right here, which a better version of that, obviously, because mine is garbage. That's why I'm using Fell Oiled Infernal Machine over that. But overall, you just want you want to cap up on your crit, you want to cap up on your mastery, of course, trying to find out what trinkets you're using, and then make sure they have some kind of passive proc that'll increase your DPS over time instead of just like, a 1 30-second burst, kind of like the Fell Oiled Machine. But this one is kind of like it's kind of separate because it's still pretty good compared to a lot of the used trinkets compared to like what is the Valor one, whatever. It increases your primary stat by like 4,000 plus or something. But anyways, that's what you're gonna want to be looking for with this spec. As for relics, definitely head towards your consistency damage. I got one I upgraded like early today is the ambidextry one, which increases offhand weapon damage of both Frost Strike and Obliterate by an extra 10%, which if you have 2 of these, it'll be quite a very large consistency buff. Can also imagine Nothing But the Boots is also going to be very viable for the consistency build, just like it was in EN. going on there. So that's what we're going to be looking at for gear and things like that. Let's go ahead and jump over to rotation. Now, since I don't have the correct legendaries, which, the chest piece would randomly throw into chains, generally around 20 stacks to increase my consistency DPS. It hits for like, 6-7 million. It's a pretty insane consistency buff using the chest piece. And I don't have the bracers, which would also be a very big buff, being that we extend out our Pillar of Frost. I'm going to be using the helmet and the ring here, which I probably won't benefit from the ring. Probably won't even go there explaining this. But what you're going to want to do with this rotation when starting off with this single target, especially since you're using Ice Cap, you're going to want to burst as quick as possible so it benefits from all the crits and things like that you're going to be getting. The other thing you want to keep in mind is you're going to want to use Gathering Storms early and dump in Obliterates to make that deal more damage. Now, the one thing I see a lot of people doing is using obliteration incorrectly during their burst, or what time they're using the obliteration. Now, I spent a lot of time kind of contemplating when to do that during the opening burst. Like, do you use it early? Do you use it later? Generally, the time I use it is when I'm first runic starved on my obliterates, and generally around that time when I start dumping frost strikes into the target, which is going to elongate again my Pillar of Frost. If I ever get any downtime between that and my next obliterates, when I'm going to pop Empowered Rune Weapon to get back my runes in. Of course, even if I don't have that proc, then I can wait till a later time, because I mean, why use it if you're not going to have any downtime? So let's go ahead and start this off. And of course, when you use Sindragosa's Fury, it's kind of like whenever you get the correct procs. Whenever you got Maximized Strength, which is from Rune of the Crusader on your weapon, and of course Cordons of Legion Fall, which increases your strength by a ton. So let's go ahead and open up on the target using this. Of course, I'm going to throw up Pillar of Frost, throw up my Oiled Infernal first. Going to throw up Remorseless Winter and start dropping Obliterates on the target as fast as possible. It should proc up our DPS quite a bit. And of course, if you have some kind of potion on use item, pre-pop potion, do that. Let's go ahead and jump on this. Let's do this. Alright, throwing up this, going to start bursting. We're dropping our Obliterates. There's the obliteration coming off. And now if I get a proc, I'll go Howling Blast. If not, I'll drop back to Frost Strike. And then coming off with the Howling Blast there. As for rotation outside of burst, it's pretty much normal, but you do want to use quite a few more Frost Strikes during the burst to keep up your Pillar of Frost for as long as possible. I did have some downtime there. I could have used Empower to increase my weapon. Of course, I didn't use Breath of Sindragosa during the peak, as I'm just showing you this rotation. And we didn't have that bad of a rotation. We didn't proc up Blood Fury either, which would have made us do quite a bit more damage. But overall, you just resort back to your normal rotation at this part. Now, as you see, I have Pillar of Frost back up, and we're going to use that definitely. Now, I do want to runic dump as hard as possible into this, and the reason being that we're going to get like 10% extra strength during this Empower, and the longer that we can elongate this out, the more consistency damage we're going to deal in the long run. Now, I've only got like 916 item level using this gear set, and we're still keeping up 950,000 consistency, which we can hold that out until the very end. You add in Bloodlust and a couple other things, and that's going to be a lot better. You add in better item level, probably a couple better trinkets, and you're looking at 1.3 1.4 mil consistency on raid bosses, and you'll really be able to clear anything with that. Mythic pluses, heroics, things like that. I've got burst up. I should burst, but no, I'm not going to do it. But that's kind of the simple rotation there, and you just kind of rotate that over and over again, buffing up your Pillar of Frost, and just rotating like that. When should you use your obliteration after that? You could either line it up with your pillar, or you can use it randomly to keep up consistency, since it is only a 1.5 minute cooldown. It's really your choice on that. But I would say probably throw it towards... Yeah, either throw it towards IBF or a time that you're not going to have any downtime. Because if you have downtime and you use your obliteration, it's not going to do much damage. It's not going to increase your crits. It's not going to be very great. But as for this is the, I'd say, raid single target DPS spec that a lot of people are going to be using. I currently won't be using this specifically. I'll be using the Breath of Sindragosa with it, since I have Helm and Ring. So if you only came for the consistency part of it, you could go ahead and leave a like and head out. Right now, we're going to jump into the breath DPS, how to open up with breath. If you're still rocking it like me, or you're a PvPer, obviously you're not going to have the raid set to run the consistency spec. I'm going to go ahead and go over the breath spec for you guys. So this is going to be generally what I'm using in Mythic Pluses and stuff like that. I have been using it in 10 plus currently because obviously I've got a little bit of gear score to catch up on. So I have been farming up those Mythic Pluses pretty hard. So let's go ahead and go over this. The only difference between consistency and the breath spec that I've been playing at the moment would be Breath of Sindragosa. If you do want to commit a little bit harder to Breath of Sindragosa, I would suggest going Horn of Winter for single target. But for Mythic Pluses, I like Murderous Efficiency so I can get a little bit better consistent AoE. So let's go ahead and talk about how to open with this breath spec on target. I would say the rotation really hasn't changed for breath at all, but the longevity of breath obviously has, and in which case, it falls off when it falls off. Generally, try to space it out as long as possible. So what I'm going to do on this target, of course, open up like I do generally anything else. Open up with my Pillar of Frost, my Remorseless Winter, things like that. Drop as many, probably 2 Obliterates, hopefully getting a Howling Blast proc, and at that point is when I'm procking the Breath of Sindragosa macro and dropping Obliterates and trying to space out Breath as long as possible. As you'll see, it'll definitely peak a lot higher than the consistency spec, but as I explained earlier, for raid DPS, it's going to fall off probably within the second burst. The other spec will overtake the breath spec. But for Mythic Pluses and short things like that, or outside questing, it's really not going to matter. So let's go ahead and do this. Opening up with that Remorseless Winter, I'm going to use 2 Obliterates. I got the proc. I'm going to breath right here. Hit that up. Oh, I had to proc it early in power. It's one of the hardest parts about it right now is when you want to use Empower. I could have spaced it out a little more there, but I'm just going to go for a full nuke on the target. As you can see, my DPS is fairly well. It's sitting up pretty high, and I really don't got to worry about much. If it's any kind of Mythic Plus, my DPS should be fine, but as you can see, my consistency is going to start waning just a little bit, but it really won't fluctuate very much, being that it's just about the same spec, being the only difference is I've got an elongated breath coming off on the target. And that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this DPS video, how to DPS on your DK, little PvE update for you guys, because I know a lot of you were very confused about what was going on with PvE. I definitely was too. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a like. Until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.